Charles Orlando, Dauphin of France, was the eldest son and heir of Charles VIII of France and Anne of Brittany. Build-up. The marriage of Charles and Anne had been celebrated in December 1491, less than a year before the Dauphin's birth. It had begun unhappily, with the new queen resenting the marriage forced upon her and the political dominance of her sister-in-law Anne, Duchess of Bourbon. Her pregnancy was thus greeted with special joy by her, as well as by the king and the people, for the depleted elder branch of the House of Valois depended on a male heir. Accordingly, Anne spent her pregnancy at ease, given the devoted attention of her husband, who ensured that she would not be tired out of subject to unnecessary travel. In the autumn of 1492, the king and queen went to the chateau of Plessis-les-Tours, where all was prepared for the birth of the hoped-for boy. Birth and life. The Queen went into labor on the night of the 10th of October and was swiftly attended to by the royal doctors and midwives. With her was Charles, who, much to the annoyance of those around, soon lost his calm due to anxiety. However, all went well, and at 4 o'clock in the morning, the Queen gave birth to a robust and well-formed boy who was automatically Dauphin of France. The Dauphin was immediately the subject of controversy. His parents and his godmother, Jehan de Paris, widow of King René I of Naples, wanted to name him Orlando, after Roland, the Carolingian hero of the Song of Roland, whose name was rendered thus in Italian. The name had been suggested to them by François of Paul, a hermit and preacher in whom they had confidence. However, the godfathers flatly refused to allow a future king of France to be given such a foreign name and begged for him to be named instead after his ancestors, Louis Philippe Charles. Finally, after 3 days of dispute, a compromise was reached. The Dauphin would be named Charles Orland in the French language, and Orlandus Carolus in Latin. This settled, the baptism was held on the 13th of October. The Dauphin, clad in cloth of gold, was carried into the church of St. Jean of Plessis by John IV of Chalon-Arlay, Prince of Orange, and was baptized in the font there, surrounded by the greatest lords of the court, each holding the candle, the basin of the towel. During the ceremony, Charles VIII held the hand of François of Paul, who led the ceremony and blessed Charles Orlando. Anne of Brittany, still recovering, was not in attendance. Described by the chronicler Philippe de Comines as a beautiful child and daring in word, not fearing the things that the other children are accustomed to fear, Charles Orlando was a healthy and vigorous child, who grew well and strong, a fluent speaker by age 3. He had a fair complexion, black eyes, and was chubby. When he reached the age of 18 months, he was installed in Amboise, monitored by 2 governors, the Lords de Boisy and the Guen, and a governess, Madame de Bussiery, and surrounded by a multitude of servants. He was the pride and joy of his parents. His mother doted on him, buying him presents. His father described him as the most beautiful of gems. Both insisted on being kept informed of his health and his progress by means of letters and messages. The king also took a series of measures in order to protect his heir. Hunting in the forest of Amboise was prohibited. The gates of the city were reduced to 4, making it easier to monitor traffic and to seal the city where necessary. Archers were posted at the strategic points of the castle, and the child was constantly in the prayers of François of Paul. In the autumn of 1495, when an epidemic of measles struck Touraine, Charles VIII ordered the child to be even more closely cloistered in Amboise, but to no avail. Charles Orlando contracted measles, and in spite of the efforts of the doctors and the prayers of the monks, he expired on the 16th of December 1495. Charles VIII, deeply affected, but advised by his physicians to remain staunch and cheerful, succeeded in hiding his sorrow, and gave herself up to her grief so violently that for a time her life and her sanity were feared for. The year following his death, a younger brother was born and he, too, was named Charles, but he only lived for less than a month. Both children were buried at St. Gatian's Cathedral, Tours, with gisants erected for them by the French sculptor Michel Colombe in 1506. Ancestry.